Welcome back, everyone. In the spring of 1945, Patton's Third Army was liberating concentration camps across southern Germany and Austria. And what his soldiers found inside those camps, the living skeletons, the mass graves, the industrial machinery of systematic murder, changed every man who saw it for the rest of his life. But there is one specific moment from those weeks that has never been told the way it deserves to be told. A moment when a group of SS officers, standing in a liberated camp surrounded by the evidence of what they had done, looked at their American captors and made a demand. They wanted better food, more than the Jewish survivors around them were receiving. They believed even in defeat, even in captivity, even surrounded by the consequences of their crimes, that they deserved more. And then they met Patton. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Patton's soldiers were finding in those camps in April and May of 1945. The liberation of the concentration camp system was not a single dramatic event. It was a rolling discovery that unfolded over weeks as the Third Army pushed deeper into Germany and Austria. Each day brought new camps. Each camp brought new horrors. And the men doing the liberating, American soldiers from farms in Ohio and cities in New York and small towns across the country who had never heard of Dachau or Mauthausen or Abensee, were being asked to absorb something that no amount of combat experience had prepared them for. The survivors they found were in conditions that the soldiers struggled to describe in their letters home. Men and women who weighed 70 or 80 pounds. People who could not stand. People who had been reduced by years of systematic starvation and brutalization to a physical state that their liberators at first could barely recognize as human beings. The medical teams that came in behind the combat units worked around the clock, trying to stabilize the survivors, trying to figure out how to feed people whose digestive systems had been so damaged by starvation that even small amounts of food could kill them. It was a medical and humanitarian crisis of a scale that the American military had no doctrine for and no real preparation for. And the SS guards and officers who had been running these camps, the men who had designed and enforced the starvation, who had selected who lived and who died, who had built and operated the machinery of the final solution. Many of them were still present when the Americans arrived. Some had fled. Some had tried to blend in with the prisoner population. Some had fought. But a significant number had simply stayed, either because they had nowhere to go or because they believed, with the particular arrogance of men who had never faced real accountability, that the Americans would treat them as soldiers and that their status as German military personnel would protect them. It was this arrogance that produced the moment in question. The specific camp and the specific date are less important than what happened. A group of SS officers being held as prisoners of war, because that was their technical status under the laws of war that the Americans were following, regardless of what those men had done, made a formal complaint through the prisoner administration system. The complaint was about food. They were not receiving adequate nutrition. The food they were being given was insufficient for men of their rank and standing. They demanded rations appropriate to their status as officers of the German military. The complaint made its way up the chain of command, and it reached Patton. Now here is something you need to understand about Patton and the camps. He had personally visited at least one major concentration camp, Ohrdruf, a subcamp of Buchenwald, which was among the first camps liberated by American forces in early April 1945. What he saw there broke something in him. He was physically sick. He wept. He ordered every American soldier in the area and every German civilian from the surrounding town to come and see what had been done in their name, in their country, behind their walls. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the world to see. He wrote in his diary that he had never experienced anything that had affected him so deeply, and that the perpetrators of what he had seen deserved no mercy and no consideration beyond what military necessity absolutely required. So, when the complaint from the SS officers reached him, when he read that these specific men who had been part of the system that produced Ohrdruf and Dachau and all the rest, were demanding better food than the Jewish survivors around them were receiving, Patton's response was not a military memo. It was not a formal administrative reply. It was volcanic. The accounts of what Patton said vary in their specific language. This was not a speech written down in advance. It was a man reacting in real time to something that hit him at the most fundamental moral level. But the substance is consistent across multiple sources. He said, in terms that left absolutely no room for misunderstanding, that these men would receive exactly what they had given. That the food the Jewish survivors were receiving, the careful, medically supervised nutrition program designed to bring starving people back from the edge of death without killing them, was more than these men deserved. That if they wanted to make complaints about their conditions, they should have considered that before they built the camps. That their status as German military officers protected them from certain things, but it did not protect them from his contempt, and it did not entitle them to a single calorie more than what they were getting. Then he went further. Patton ordered that the SS officers be housed in conditions that reflected, as closely as American military regulations would allow, the conditions they had imposed on their victims, not torture, not illegal treatment, but no comfort, no privilege, no acknowledgement of rank or status beyond what the laws of war absolutely required. They would sleep on the ground if that was what was available. They would eat what was available. They would wait in lines. They would be processed like the prisoners they were, rather than the officers they claimed to be. Every concession to their comfort that was not legally mandatory was denied. He also ordered, and this detail has been preserved in multiple accounts, that the SS officers be required to participate in the cleanup and burial operations at the camps. The physical labor of dealing with the consequences of what they had built, American soldiers supervised, the SS officers worked, and Patton, when informed of this arrangement, said something to the effect that it was the least they could do and significantly less than they deserved. The reaction among the American soldiers who heard about Patton's response was immediate and visceral. These were men who had walked through the camps, who had seen the survivors, who had helped carry people who weighed nothing to medical stations, who had dug mass graves and tried to count bodies that were beyond counting. They had been following the rules about prisoner treatment with the professional discipline of trained soldiers, but the rules had felt wrong in a way that was hard to articulate when the prisoners in question were the men who had run these places. Patton had articulated it for them, and more than articulated it, had done something about it within the boundaries of what was legally possible. There is a broader truth here about Patton and justice that this incident illuminates. Patton was not a gentle man. He was not a man who believed in extensive mercy for those who had committed serious wrongs. But his understanding of justice was not arbitrary or personal. It was proportional. It was connected, in his mind, to the actual weight of what had been done. The SS officers demanding better food than Jewish survivors were not just making an administrative complaint. They were asserting, in the most obscene possible way, that the hierarchy of human worth that had governed their crimes was still in operation, that they were still more important than the people they had tried to destroy. Patton's response was to say, with complete clarity and without any diplomatic softening, "No, that hierarchy is over. It ended when we drove through your gates, and you will live in the world that your actions have created, not the world you imagined you were entitled to." This was not a popular position in every quarter. There were military lawyers and administrative officers who were concerned about the legal implications of differential treatment of prisoners. There were people who argued that however reprehensible the SS officers' crimes, the laws of war existed for a reason, and departing from them set dangerous precedents. These were not foolish arguments. The laws of war do exist for a reason. Reciprocity matters. Precedent matters. Patton knew this. He did not abandon the laws of war. He found every inch of space within them and used it to its maximum extent in service of something that felt, to the men who had walked through those camps, like the absolute minimum response that human decency required. The SS officers did not get better food. They did not get acknowledgement of their rank. They did not get the treatment they demanded. They got what Patton decided they deserved within the limits of what the law allowed. And the Jewish survivors, people who had been